Welcome to this quick start guide for Studio One 7.2, and in this video we're going to cover as much as possible to get you up and running with Studio One 7.2 in about 15 minutes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on this. And first thing I'm going to do is press Shift and F as in Frank, to enter into full screen mode. And actually, before we get started, just know that if you are struggling to get going with Studio One, I do provide one-on-one training over Zoom. And you can find more information about that in the pinned comment below or the description of this video. Okay, so with that out of the way, we'll go ahead and start off with the start page here. So up at the top, we have a batch converter, so we can import batches of files and apply certain processing to them. We have our SoundCloud, where we can link our SoundCloud account and upload songs directly from Studio One to your SoundCloud. We have a macro organizer here. Now, below we have new for bringing up the new song dialog, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. We can open, join. We have recent files, songs, projects, and shows. So with recent files, any songs that you've been working on are going to be listed here. If you'd like to pin them, we can hover on the left, and we have this pin icon. Once I pin that, we have a little disclosure arrow that pops up, and we can see all of our pinned songs by clicking on that arrow there. So if you're a prolific songwriter, this is going to be filled up. So if you have ones that you kind of want to manage and keep readily available, just use that pin icon. Clicking again, we can take those off. We also have a search field for searching for songs. Now, for these other tabs for songs, this is going to show you all of the songs that you have saved, and it's going to pull this information from the default location where you are saving your songs. By default, that's going to be your Documents folder. So if I Control, let's come to Locations. By default, this is going to go to your Documents folder. You'll have a Studio One folder. I've changed this to go to my desktop, Quanta Audio, and Studio One. But just know that when you are clicking on these tabs, what you see is going to be pulled from this location here. Okay, we'll cancel out of there. Projects, this is any mastering and shows for the show page for live performances. But we'll come back to recent files. We have an artist profile. So if you'd like to set one up for yourself, you can click on the ellipsis here and add a photo. You can add the name of your artist, the genre, a website. We have this paper icon where we can add additional artists, so we can have multiple artist profiles if you need to. Now here we have a SoundCloud panel, the news feed from Presonus. If you'd like to set up your audio interface, you can click here. This will take us to the Audio Setup tab of the Options menu. You can click on this downward drop-down menu and choose your audio interface. If you click on the control panel, that's going to open up the proprietary software for that audio interface, so you can make adjustments there. I'm just using Windows Audio for my screen capture software. But generally, I would use my Focusrite, and then when I click on control panel, that will take up the little window for setting its parameters. We can see our block size, sample rate, input and output latency. Okay, we'll cancel out of there. Now, we also have Configure Audio Device, which will take us to the same menu, Configure External Device, and this will allow us to set up any external MIDI controllers. So you can come to the bottom, click on Add, and then on the left-hand side, you can see different manufacturers. So if you have something from Akai, for instance, you can click on that. Say the MPK Mini, you can select that, and then add from here. And let's again cancel out of here. At the very bottom, we have check for updates. So to be sure you're using the latest version, you can just click here. Clicking on About will show you the version number that you're using and some other details about the product. But let's go ahead and jump into the song page, because that's where most of us are going to be working. I'll press Control and N as in Nancy, and we start off on the Record and Mix. This is what we'll mostly want unless you're doing any mastering or you want to use the show page. When you have this selected, you're going to see a brief description here to the right. So if I select Master and Release, master a set of tracks for publishing, and that's again going to take you to the mastering page. Now, if you're using a Presonus audio interface, you can scroll down to the bottom and we have audio interfaces. And then here you can click and choose your particular model from the Presonus line, and that will set up your inputs and outputs for you. Okay, but we'll come back up to the Record and Mix. We then have the location where this song folder is going to be saved at. I have mine directed to the desktop because when I'm working on a song, 90% of the time I'm not going to keep it because I'm really hard on my music, and I'm only going to keep it if I like it, and 90% of the songs I work on, I don't keep. Okay, so next we have sample rate and resolution. I generally recommend to my students 48 kilohertz and 24-bit. You can do your own research to make up your own mind on that. We have stretch audio files to tempo. This is selected by default, I believe. So just keep in mind that if you're going to be bringing in audio files to mix and they have BPM data embedded, they will be stretched to your song tempo, which is currently 140 BPM. Okay. Now we can also drop files here that we would like to use in our song. And we have a customization here where we can adjust the tools that we're seeing within Studio One. So I've created my own preset, which is a bit parsed back from the complete view. But just so that we're all on the same page, I'm going to leave this on complete. Let's click OK. We now have the song page. Now on the left, we have our track column. If I click on the eye, we have our inspector. We have a track list view here. This is going to help us to manage songs that have a ton of different tracks. Let's close out that inspector. We have our various tools at the top. By default, we're going to start on the arrow tool, but I can use the number keys at the top of my QWERTY keyboard to change. So if I press 2, we switch to the range tool. 3 will be the split tool, 4 the eraser, 5 the paint, and so on. Okay, I'll press 1 to come back to the arrow tool. We have some other tools here. So this is going to be our bend panel for warping or stretching audio, our split, which is going to allow us to remove quiet areas from audio events. We have our detailed quantize panel, which ties into the controls here. So right now this is set to 16th, and if I zoom in a bit by left click, hold, and dragging, we can see 16th note subdivisions. But if I were to click and change this to quarter, then now we switch to quarter note subdivisions. And you can see in the detailed quantize panel, this switches to quarter note. So if I click here for 8th note, we can see that that changes and updates here. But I'll change that back to quarter notes. And let's close out that quantize panel. We then have our macro panel here, quantize controls, turning snap on and off. We have ripple edit. This is for auto scroll and some other things here, auto zoom. If you'd like to see help, then you can activate this question mark. And this is basically going to update to show you different actions that you can perform depending on what you're hovering on. We'll close that out. We have a video player that we can access here. And we have a new launcher, which is new in a recent version of Studio One. So we can record and arrange clips with this new feature there. And we have a scratch pad. So if I click on that, we have a separate view where we can drag events from our main arrange view and store them there, or experiment with them here and bring them back. They'll just automatically be copied. Okay, we'll close that one out. Now, all the way over to the right, you can see your profile with Studio One. We have a little house icon. This is going to take us back to the start page. Now notice that this little paper icon is highlighted. This is going to take us back to the song that we're working in. We then have our browser. By default, this is going to be on the Home tab. And here we can choose whether we want to access instruments, effects, loops, splice, files, and so on. These tie in with the tabs up above. So let's actually hover on the corner and pull that out a bit. So if I click on instruments, then we can see that the tab reflects that selection up above. If I want to come to effects, then I can click there. We can also, a relatively new feature is click on this upward facing arrow and float the browser. Hovering at the bottom corner, I can also adjust its size like so. Let's click on that downward facing arrow to reattach that, and we'll come back to the Home tab and close out the browser. Now we have our mix console down at the bottom. Clicking on mix, we can open that up. We have an upward facing arrow that we can use to float that, make it full screen, and even put that on a separate window if we'd like for a second monitor. We then have our edit for editing audio and video. This can also be floated. If we had something in here, we'd have the option to float it, but we don't, so we'll come back to that. Now, if we'd like to record audio, I can press T as in Tom to bring up the Add Tracks dialog, and we can name the track. the count, whether we want one track or we could add multiple tracks just by clicking. Auto color, or if I deselect, I can choose a specific color, but I'll leave that on. Auto color. The format, I want mono because I'm using one mic, and then we can choose the input from our audio interface that we'd like to use. So I'll click on OK, and then I'll press Shift and E to expand this out or zoom in vertically. Now let's arm this. Now we can hear that this is monitoring. There's a bit of delay because I'm using Windows Audio. So I'm going to turn the monitoring off, but if you're using headphones, which you'll want to do when we're recording with a microphone, you can activate this so that you can hear yourself in your headphones. Now all I have to do is come down to the bottom, press record, and now we can see that my narration is being recorded within Studio One. So I'll press the space bar to stop, and then now that we have our audio event or our audio recorded, I can come to this handle at the top, click, hold, and drag, and pull that up to increase the level. Pulling down, we decrease the level. Okay, in the top right corner, we have a handle for adding a fade out. The top left, we can add a fade in. We can also trim our audio by hovering at the edge, like so, and then just left click and pull to the right or left. If I right click, we have a ton of different options here. We can see the file tempo, and the file tempo is 140 because that's what our song is. We can speed it up or slow it down. So if I were to put 0.5 in here, then that's going to play back at half speed. If I were to put 2, then it's going to play it back at twice the speed. We can transpose in semitones or tune in synths. We can work with bend markers, a gain envelope for adding points here. Come to the top using the trim tool to adjust audio levels like so. Right clicking again. We have a ton of different options down at the bottom, so this opens up an additional menu that you can explore on your own. Some audio options and instrument parts for when we're working with instruments, virtual instruments. Okay, let's actually right click and take that gain envelope off. If I press comma, we can see our playback cursor is here, but if I press comma, that's going to take it back to the beginning. Let's record. And now we can see that I can play that back. I can also click in the ruler to position this wherever I'd like to play back. One. So, okay, now zooming, I can left click hold in the ruler to zoom in or out. I can also press E to zoom in or W to zoom out. If I hold Shift and E, I can zoom in vertically, Shift and W to zoom out vertically. Let's comma to come back to the beginning of our song. Now let's take a look at recording a virtual instrument. If I click on Browse, then I can come to Instruments. Let's open up the personas. I'll bring in a presence, and just notice that once I drag this in and release with my left mouse button, we're automatically going to have an instrument track that's added. And let's close out our browser. We've got our presence, and then here I can come to the top, Artist Instruments, and let's say I want to use a guitar. I can click on that, and now it's a horrible sounding guitar, but we've got a guitar, and I can press caps lock. That's going to bring up the virtual keyboard, or if you have a MIDI controller, you can use the MIDI controller. But now I can, let's mute the narration. This is already armed, and for recording and monitoring, I'll click on record at the bottom. And we've got our, I'll press the space bar to stop, and we've got our MIDI recorded. I'll press caps lock to get rid of that virtual QWERTY keyboard, and let's close out our presence. So we've got our MIDI here. I'll press solo and comma to come back to the beginning. Okay, now if you notice here, I made an error because we actually recorded over our previous audio. So I should have turned record arm off, and let's come back to the beginning and enter into record. And now we're just going to be recording the MIDI, and our audio is not being recorded over. So be sure that you only have record arm on tracks that you want to record over once you click on this record button in the transport. Now, at any time that you'd like to access the virtual instrument, we can click on this piano icon there, toggling the view for that. Now, if we'd like to add effects to our audio or virtual instruments, we can open up the browser, we can then come to the Effects tab. Let's just say that I'd like to add some reverb to that guitar. We can scroll down. These are all in alphabetical order. We can also search at the top if we'd like to do it like that. But here's our room reverb. I'll click and drag it onto the track I'd like to add it to and release. And now when I play this back, we've got our reverb. So we will eventually want to close this out, but if you need to access it again, we can come to the inspector and we can see while this track is selected, our room reverb is here. I can double click to access it like so. If we don't want to use the inspector, we can also open up the mix console, and let's pull this up a little bit here. We can see our room reverb there. If I double click, we can access it to adjust its parameters like so. Now we can also add effects. So if I come to the narration track and let's say I'll click on this plus, I can type in DLAY. We've got our delays. I'll arrow down to the analog delay, press enter to accept that.
And we've got the space bar.
And now we can hear our analog delay on our narration track. If you'd like to work with loops, let's go ahead and close out that mix console. Come to our browse. We can select the loops tab. And let's come to drums. And a lot of these loops are pretty cheesy, but we can see that those show up. And we can even see a waveform to see what's going on with those. By double clicking, we can audition those. We also have stop and play controls down at the bottom. We have additional information about the loop that we have selected or file. And we can see that it's 44.1, 24-bit stereo. We can see its length and the BPM data that's embedded into it if it is. And then we can just left click hold and drag that into our song. Let's close out our browser. If I'd like to set a loop around this region or this loop, I can press P as in Paul, take note in the ruler up above. We now have this gray bar that shows up, and now I can press /, and let's click here to position our playback cursor there. And when the loop is active, we're just going to keep playing this back over and over. And so you can add different instruments and record your passages like so. Now, if you'd like to program your own drums, we can come back to the browser. Let's come to the Instruments tab and Personas. I can drag in an impact, just left click hold and drag that to the bottom there. And then let's load up a kit. And okay, we've got our sounds loaded. And if you would like to manually program, our loop is active. So when I double click, we now have a MIDI part that's added. And I can double click on this again, and we're taken to the edit window with the drum view active. Clicking here, we can switch to the piano view or piano roll, drum view, and this is score, the score view. But now, if I hold control, I can use my mouse wheel to zoom in, and without holding control, I can move up or down, and I can start adding Let's solo the impact. Okay, like so. Also, if you don't like the drum view, we have a pattern sequencer. So what I'm going to do is right click on this and let's come to musical functions, I believe. Actually, it's instrument parts. We can convert that part to pattern. Okay, so now when I double click on this, we're taken to the pattern sequencer, and I can extend this out to be 32 steps, and I can continue on with Okay, now we need to extend this out to cover everything. Let's press P as in Paul to set our loop around this. Now we have these other controls, so if I were to click here to automatically add and fill these in, coming down we have this little mountain looking icon where we can access velocity for our drum one-shots. We can add repeats, we can add a delay so everything's not so rigid and mechanistic sounding. We can even add probability to how often these will be played back. Now we can also add swing up at the top here. Okay, so that's how you can go about laying drums by yourself within Studio One. Now, once we've created our song and we're finished arranging and everything, we can press Control and E as in Eddie to bring up the Export Mixdown dialog. We can then choose a location by clicking on the ellipsis. That will bring up our Explorer window, and we can choose a location there, and we can give it a name, if I can spell, and we can choose the format. So if we'd like a WAV file, then we can select. Clicking on the title, we can adjust its parameters, 24-bit 48. If we'd like an MP3, just be sure that that's checked, and we can set its parameters, and we have a ton of other options here that we can export as well. Now, between loop is going to be the default setting for this. So if we would like to export our entire song, let's press Escape to come out of that window. I'll drag this loop region all the way to the end. Let's Control and E to bring up the Export Mixdown again. Now, between loop, this is what's going to be exported to our final WAV or MP3. All right, now we have some other controls. They're a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial, but this is the main one that you need to pay attention to. The location, giving it a name, the file format that you want, and then you could just click on OK, and then this is going to be exported out. Okay, now I had a message that clipping has occurred, so yeah, I'll go ahead and delete these exported files. So just keep in mind that when you're working on your songs, you're going to need to pay attention if you are clipping here. So we're clipping by 1. So since it's such a small amount of clipping, I could click on the plus here. Let's type in LIM for the limiter. I'll press enter, and we'll do -1 dB limiting. Close that out, Control E. We'll click on OK. And now you can see we're no longer getting that error message. So if you just have a small amount of clipping, you can use the limiter to do that. If you have a lot of clipping, then you're going to need to manage your your levels. You're going to need to mix the song properly, use things like gain staging, etc. And you're not going to have a problem. But that's way beyond the scope of this tutorial. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. This went on a little bit longer than I had planned, but I hope it's been useful. I also have a hour-and-a-half long tutorial for getting started in Studio One. So I'll leave a little link here that you can click on if you'd like to view that. And also, if you'd like to work one-on-one with me over Zoom, be sure to check out information in the description or pinned comment of this video. The meeting can be recorded so that you have a video file for future reference. And the meeting can go as slow or as fast as possible. We can cover everything with Studio One, mixing concepts, sound design, and synthesis basics. So the web training can be a huge time saver. And so instead of spending 3-4 hours just trying to find the answer to one question, that can be answered for you within seconds when we're in the meeting. So again, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.